So we're back for our second episode of the Corona Time podcast. This week we're reviewing Clerks, which is a cult classic, 1994, I believe, film by Kevin Smith.
Yep, Kevin Smith. Yep.
Yeah, so kind of how the format is my name is Alexis. I'm here with my co-host Chris. Essentially, how the format is going to work is we're going to basically pick a film to review each week, and we're going to alternate who gets to decide what films we're going to be reviewing for the following week. So Chris chose Clerks for this week. So next week, I'll unveil what film we're going to be reviewing.
Nice.
So yeah. Anyway, so we're back for episode 2. We're still kind of new at this. We're trying to get used to sort of the format and the style that we are going to want our podcast to sort of feel and look like. But yeah, we'll get better as we go along with our reviews. Anyway, so do you want to start off, Chris? What were your thoughts?
I do want to start off. So
go ahead. So just hold on. Let me just sort of preface this by saying we're both from California, like we said in episode 1, except Chris, for the past 4 years, has been living in New Jersey. So this kind of hits home a little more for him than it does for me. I'm currently in North Carolina. But because the film sort of takes place in New Jersey, and Kevin Smith, the director and star, is from New Jersey, a lot of what takes place in the film, some of the references, Chris can touch upon quite a bit that I didn't quite catch. So you can go ahead and begin, Chris.
Yeah, so before I get any further, I would like to, I think one thing we forgot to preface this episode and the last episode is that we're not spoiler free. So like we do touch upon some topics that if you haven't seen the movie, you're going to be thrown off, or if you have seen it, obviously you'll understand what we're talking about. This last week we covered Primer, and I think we forgot to mention that. So like you said earlier, we're still learning as we go. So I would say that now.
From every episode going forward, we'll be sure to preface, and I'll be sure for this episode at the beginning to ensure that there's a slide saying spoiler alerts. So if you haven't seen this film, go ahead and watch it first. We're just sort of giving our summary and opinions on the films. Like we said in episode 1, we are not by any means any film critics. We're just some amateurs that essentially are not anywhere in the film industry. We just want to give our takes as sort of an average viewer. Now, we do enjoy films and TV series, and so we want to sort of give our takes on what we think of the films that we're reviewing. Anyway, so you can go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and then on a personal note, I will say that like one thing I'm kind of hopeful for this podcast is like I actually try to pick films that they're kind of well known, but they're also maybe they're not really, like in the terms of like Clerks, like here in this area, New Jersey, you'll everybody's kind of seen it. But obviously, like, people, across the country, around the world, they probably know of Kevin Smith and maybe don't know of this particular film, even though this is probably one of his more famous ones. But yeah, like you mentioned, it came out in 94. The budget was $27,000. He actually maxed out like 8 credit cards, like used his college money to pay for this, and, just scrambled. It reminds me a little bit with Primer, like it's kind of like a first film, self-funded, and like it's shot all in basically one block because he was working at the store where the film takes place, and he just asked the owner to let him shoot there at the Quick Stop and also the video store, which is actually closed. The Quick Stop is actually still open, so that's an interesting tidbit. But I can get into that towards the end about more of the Jersey specific stuff. But a little more about Kevin Smith is just that like he actually owns a comic book store called Secret Stash in Red Bank. I've actually been to Red Bank. It's a very nice area. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would want to bring up that's specific to the film that's important is that he had to film at night because the owner obviously was running a business that day, and that's why you have the shed, he wrote in the shed being like gum locks, being closed because the film had to take place during the day, and it wouldn't make sense for Dante to be there. Dante's the main character to be there like during the night all the time. And also another tidbit that it's covered in interviews, but if people don't know, it was shot 21 straight days. So he shot like back to back all the way. And he only was getting on average 2 hours for sleep per night. So, I think in this film particularly, you see a lot of, I think Kevin Smith's own, I think he projects himself in his own characters, Dante and Randall. But yeah, my initial overall thoughts is like, it's been a while since I laughed in a movie this much. Like there's many scenes where I was just pounding my table, like, oh my god, this is so funny. And having lived here for 4 years and gone to learn about like the ins and outs a little bit of New Jersey, these are the kind of people actually you would kind of meet hanging out on the Jersey Shore. Like I know like there's been the Sopranos and there's been the TV show The Jersey Shore, but those are all caricatures to a degree of like New Jersey. Well, like you'll actually see people in their mid-20s or like early 20s that are like just shit talking like this all the time, like at the bar. I mean, I have seen it. It's just that's another thing that clicked in my brain. I was just laughing because I was like, I literally see these guys at the certain parts of the Jersey Shore just hanging out and just like talking about the nastiest crap, So, anyways, I'm interested in what you thought as somebody who's just viewing it as a comedic film.
Yeah, so let me just also preface this by saying, if you haven't seen this film, the humor may not be for everybody. I personally enjoyed it quite a bit, but it does get kind of raunchy. It's a film that was essentially starring two people. I believe they were in their 20s at the point when the film was shot. So the humor definitely might not be for everyone. There is quite a bit of vulgarity, so if you're not into that, you probably won't enjoy this film quite as much. Now, I will say that, personally, that this humor did quite kind of hit home. It was just a lot of smack talking that was going on within it, a lot of bantering back and forth, and a lot of sort of situations that I think a lot of people can sort of relate to. You don't have to necessarily be from New Jersey to, I don't know, imagine or know people or yourself have these personal experiences from what they were talking about, like the typical guy that can't get over his ex or can't decide between who he's dating if he wants to break up with his current girlfriend for one of his exes. Like, we've either been in those situations or know people personally who can relate to those situations. So it kind of hits home because it touches upon a lot of experiences, that sort of slice of life that a lot of, I'm sure, people in their 20s and older can really relate to. So that sort of day-to-day kind of humor, it kind of hits home in terms of the humor that I really enjoy quite a bit. And with Kevin Smith putting his own sort of personal flair and personality into it, I think he did a really good job sort of shooting in a convenience store over the course of like a day. What I really found funny was the fact that Randall, during the funeral scene, they go in. So at the first, they're shooting as if they're just going in, and then the next scene, they're automatically getting kicked out and having stuff thrown at them because it's later revealed that Randall knocked over the coffin. That kind of like humor, just like I was laughing so hard during that scene. I liked it. And another tidbit, I know this is shot in New Jersey, and I'm sure a lot of people are either Penguins, Flyers, or especially Devils fans, since the Devils are the New Jersey Devils. But I imagine you're fans of different teams depending on what part of Jersey you're in, because I know Philly's very close. I found it sort of funny that Kevin Smith was wearing a Penguins jersey, which I did not quite expect. And I don't know if you caught this, Chris. We're both from San Jose, California. And at one point, I believe Jay was wearing a San Jose Sharks hat back in, this is 94, so the franchise was just born. We're both really big Sharks fans. So that kind of made me pretty happy to see that. I mean, that's my team since forever, even though they crush our spirits pretty much every year. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
I actually missed that. I must have been laughing too hard, but I'm not surprised because, like, in Jersey, hockey is actually pretty big. Like when I first got here and I started my new job, I was actually surprised that a lot of people they played recreationally. Like obviously they play recreationally, like in San Jose, like either street hockey or like in the rink. But I mean, these were like guys that like. I mean, they complained that their backs hurt and stuff because they got checked the day before. Like it was a bit surprising. This wasn't just stuff that like kids played. Like there are people who've been playing hockey like for 20 years now. So even if it's recreationally,
that's something that. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that like growing up in California, that's something that like I think we would have done with maybe basketball or something. But like these guys, they play hockey as if it was like the number one sport. They're pretty passionate around here about the hockey. So whether they're Devils or Flyers or Penguins fans. So what's funny that the one thing that usually everybody hates is Rangers. That's a little tidbit, but
that's not too surprising to me. The one thing I will say, growing up in San Jose, is we don't really have that many big franchise sports teams. Essentially, the two, I guess, biggest would be the Sharks, obviously. Although I guess it wouldn't be so obvious if you don't really follow hockey, and the San Jose Earthquakes. But by far, growing up in San Jose, most people are Sharks fans. I worked at several different companies. One of my managers, he was in his 40s, and he would play on an adult rec hockey team, and he would kind of have that mentality where it's like, man, you'd walk around and you'd see him walking around and he'd have like sort of some background, and be like, what happened? And he's like, it's sort of a hockey injury, like we were playing a little too rough. So that's something that I think a lot of people, not necessarily in California, but specifically in San Jose, can sort of relate to a little bit, in that a lot of people really like hockey. And so that's something that when they were playing or having the little impromptu street match on the roof, I think a lot of people, especially where we're from, can sort of appreciate that a little bit.
Yeah.
Not that we take hockey quite as seriously as in Jersey.
Yeah, going back to, well, I think in San Jose actually it's pretty serious now, but yeah, at least anyways, going back to the humor you were mentioning, I knew this was going to be like, I had not like written like, I hadn't read any like, Wikipedia or anything. I wanted to go in clean, even though I heard a lot of hype around the movie locally. I knew this was going to be a different type of movie when Dante and his girlfriend, I guess soon to be ex, but girlfriend in the beginning of the movie, Veronica, are talking about like how many people they slept with, right? And that's an old like classic conversation. And then
that's
like,
that's what I call a trap. But go ahead.
Yeah, but the twist is so funny where she freaks out that he's had sex with 12, and then she says she's given like 37 blowjobs, and he's just like, what? and then the snowballing thing. I was just laughing so hard. I was just like, yeah, a guy would react like that. Like, what is it? And she's like, I only had sex with 3 people, but you saw 37. I was just like laughing so hard. Like, that's too much, And like you were saying, like, it's raunchy. And actually, a little bit more history is that the initial rating of this movie was actually NC-17. Obviously now this kind of comedy is very common. Like, we had Superbad, we've had other movies, but I guess in '94, if you think about the 80s and the type of comedy, which was Cosby and Cheers, this was like I can see it's profane. Nobody, like, you don't see many movies made in that period where they're literally talking about oral sex, basically. So,
yeah, I would say the 80s was far more like conservative for the most part. There are obvious, I guess, exceptions to that. But yeah, there was definitely like a shift, I would say, in the 90s and going into like the 2000s towards a different sort of style. Even in the 90s, because we're both like 90s babies and we grew up. Jerry Springer was coming out at that point, and he wasn't exactly the most, I would say, clean show or family-friendly show. So there was a definite shift going from Cheers into like the Fresh Prince sort of style shows in the early 90s, and then leading into like Jerry Springer and those type of shows. And obviously a lot of this humor is pretty prevalent in a lot of mainstream sort of R-rated films. But yeah, that's just part, circling back to that specific scene where they were talking about how many partners they've had. It was pretty funny because, yeah, what the guys find sort of acceptable and not is just pretty sort of funny. He was okay that she had I think 2 or 3 different partners.
It was 3 partners, yeah.
Right, and he was cool with that, but then when he found out how many other dudes she'd actually fooled around with, but not gone the full way with, that was not acceptable because that was a very high number, or at least pretty high number according to most people's, I would say, standards. So it was pretty funny seeing that scene and seeing him freak out. He's like, she's like, well, I told you I've only like gone the full way with 3. Yeah, but you've gone like partially with like 37.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of dudes would sort of freak out. But that's the whole thing. Like when you're in a relationship with someone and they ask you like, what's your count or whatever, that's sort of a trap. You got to be very careful because you can do a lot of trouble, or that can cause a lot of tension with whoever you're with.
And the rating changed to R because they were able to push that, like, yeah, they're saying a lot of vulgarities, but they're not showing anything, right? There is no
they don't.
sexting, there is no like now, like I'm thinking of like movies that I've seen the last like 10 years, and I'm like that they show a lot more than this movie ever did. So it's also the time period and like how the culture was shifting, because this is before yeah, this is before South Park, and this is before Family Guy and stuff like this. So,
well, I will say in this movie there was no nudity, nothing like that. It was just all sort of implied. It was all banter, basically.
yeah.
And so I don't know how they necessarily justified it being like an NC-17 rating, because it's just all sort of the conversational, smack talking that they're doing, or sexual language that they're using, which, yeah, I could see how it was like during a more conservative time period, but it still sort of puzzles me that they would even consider that necessarily an NC-17 rating without any nudity whatsoever.
I think it reflects on the time period. Also, it was a low budget movie, and they probably felt like, it's raunchy and they could probably bully it, but they're able to push back, I think, to their credit. But going to my favorite character, dude, I just love Randall's character. I mean, I just love those scenes where like she's like the old lady's asking which movie is better, and he's just like, I don't care.
Neither either. They're both terrible, and he's like, you're not even paying attention.
And he's like, exactly. And then when he spits in the guy's face, I was just like, that's stuff that I found hilarious. But
so I guess I gotta ask you this: do you think this is? I know you've only lived in New Jersey for the past 4 years, so it's a very short time frame compared to the rest of your life because you're from California. From what you've seen or experienced in Jersey, do you think, based on because New Jersey doesn't always get the best rap when it comes to portrayal in media, do you think this is one of the best representations of what New Jersey residents are typically like, or at least certain sections of New Jersey residents? Because I know, especially from shots of the Jersey Shore, which is obviously set in New Jersey, there's obvious stereotypes that I wouldn't necessarily assume to be true that they're trying to show in that show, and they don't give a really great representation.
Yeah, what I would say is Clerks is kind of in my opinion, the Citizens Kane of New Jersey, in the sense that this movie, I think more accurately represents the kind of people, the kind of, I guess, guys that you would meet up at the, the Jersey Shore bars versus the TV show, the Jersey Shore. People in, like I said, mid-20s, 23, 24, 25, that are working those odd-end jobs. And like I said, I've actually gone out on the Jersey Shore and actually talked to some of them. They were like, yeah, I work odd jobs for the year so I can party in the summer. And the whole stereotypes of the Guidos and stuff like that, that really came from obviously the show, but also there's a lot of people from Staten Island that come down, and they're all about that gym and tan culture. Now you'll still find people in Jersey that are like that, because there's a lot of people move back and forth between New Jersey and New York. But the two characters, Dante and Randall, you can tell that Kevin Smith, he pulled from his own experiences, because these are probably people that he himself kind of is, because I can see him injecting himself in both characters, but also friends that he's had that are they were like this, and like I said, when you meet more people who grew up in the area, that's how they are, and they even kind of still dress like that with the hats and the kind of the beach clothes and stuff, because it's warmer down there than it is obviously upstate New York or upstate New Jersey. So.
Right. Yeah, the one sort of stereotype I think that they were trying to touched upon a little bit that I found funny was his little scene with the personal trainer, because he was just talking smack about how Kevin Smith was out of shape. He's like, I'm not out of shape. He's like, yeah, you do. Let me hold on, let me squeeze your muscle, flex a little. He's like, I'm not doing that. He's like, see, you're lacking confidence. I feel like there are certain people. I've only driven through New Jersey. I haven't met a lot of people. This is a long time ago, but I imagine there's a good subsection, just like anywhere, that is really into their fitness too.
No, yeah. That is definitely true. Yeah, I'm talking more about how the TV show, they made it a whole bigger thing.
Oh yeah.
But, yeah, you'll definitely see people who are definitely into their fitness, and actually they're the ones that are most annoying at the bars and stuff. But
just like anywhere, right?
Yeah, but but it's the same thing even in California, which doesn't have that It's not as well known, well thought of. But if you go and hang out in LA or even San Diego, you'll meet the same kind of people. It's
for sure.
For some reason that beach showing off culture. But like I said, I think Kevin Smith has lost weight recently because of his heart attack. But if you look at most of his life, he was that he was
bigger dude.
he was the Bob size. And yeah, a lot of people in Jersey are they're like Jay and Silent Bob. They just do weed and they just hang out. Like they don't do anything else, you know. And they go to like underground music festivals, you know, like so. But yeah, I think that's why I think Clerks is a true like Jersey film, doing like, you know, air quotes a little bit. Because like it touches upon like all the little bit of the stereotypes, but also like what I like about the movie is that like there is references, but it's nothing that impedes anybody else from enjoying the movie. Like I like I've mentioned, I've seen mentioned before in like online forums and stuff that, like, you know, in the beginning, the newspaper stand that he steals from is the Asbury Park Press, and like I personally have read that paper, you know, and not the physical version, but online. And like he just puts it in the newsstand. Now it's an opening scene, but like obviously it doesn't like affect the plot really. But like if you are from the area, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know that paper, and not many people do, you know, and not people who have read the paper. So there's little things, like I said, like even like where it's shot and where it's located, which is pretty much near Middletown, New Jersey. You know, it has like that distinct, you know, like I don't want to say look, I want to say aesthetic, because like what I didn't realize when I moved here was that like there is like roads, but there's no parking. So like that store, like if you look at it on Google Maps, there's one road that runs by it and there's like 4 parking spaces. And then like it's parking here in this state is actually tough, but it's unless it's a mall. But that's because of the, I don't know, like just how it's designed. But there's a lot of like, you know, single like you know, 2-lane roads, or they call highways, which I don't know why they're highways, but you know. Yeah, it's a very what I was gonna say is like it's a very like yeah, unique film in the sense of like its topic, but also its creator. And I think I haven't seen all Kevin Smith movies, but like he has enough. He likes to do enough self references to where he grew up and stuff. And I think that's why his fans like him, honestly. So like if you read a lot about him, like there's nothing. Most people don't say bad things about, other than like maybe he could have pushed himself more creatively, but he's kind of happy now. So
yeah, he definitely, from what I can tell, he reps New Jersey like pretty well. You can tell like he tries to paint it in like a more positive light, especially from like interviews I've seen. So yeah, I will say one thing about the film that I kind of liked, or I guess being like a millennial from the 90s, the fact that it was shot in black and white kind of gave it a nostalgic kind of feel. And the fact that, you know, it's a convenience store that's right next to a video store, I clearly remember, and this probably like has a lot to do with why I like the film too. So it reminded me of like when I was a kid, you know, we'd go into the local video stores or Blockbuster. And in fact, that's sort of what reminded me when his friend Randall goes, he's like, hey, let me borrow your car. And he goes to the other video store. It's like, yeah, I used to go to like these sort of smaller chain video stores, video rentals, and then you go to Blockbuster, and it was like night and day difference in terms of the selection that these places would have. So it was kind of funny because you could definitely tell it was a sort of a reference to the times that not necessarily everyone who's younger would get, but for those people who were born or grew up around that time, it's definitely like, oh yeah, I can totally relate to that kind of feel of like, yeah, you want to go to like the better video store that has like all the selections.
Yeah, with the black and white thing, actually, remember last week if you recall, we touched upon how like the budget impacts the movie, which you have the same movie with a different budget. So because Kevin Smith was forced to film at night, that was his creative decision to make it look like it was the day to do the black and white thing. So it's I wonder if he had more money, it would have been more of a non-black and white movie. So
right, and I agree with you.
We'll never know. Yeah.
I'm just saying, just that sort of aesthetic gave it a more nostalgic feel to me personally.
So I mean that I can agree with. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if he had the choice, if it wasn't shot during the night, if he would have gone in that direction. I'm just saying the fact that he did. Yeah, it's sort of a nostalgic kind of film because a lot of the things that they sort of touch upon are references, not just specifically in New Jersey, but it's just like a lot of them kind of reminded me of the 90s or that sort of time period of like when I was a kid. So yeah, I kind of like that part or that feel to it. What did you think was your sort of funniest moment in the film, out of curiosity?
Or what made you laugh the hardest? Actually, this is a perfect. It's not even written in the. So for those of you listening, this wasn't even like written as a setup question, but I was gonna just touch upon this. My favorite part was I want to get your thoughts on the Caitlyn having sex with the the dead guy in the fridge. I was laughing so hard when Dante comes in and she's like, "Stop joking. We had the greatest sex ever." He's just like, "I wasn't even there," and I'm laughing, dying. And even Randall's like, "Whoa, what happened here?" Oh
Yeah,
man,
that was quite awkward, and I had completely forgot that earlier in the show that guy had used the restroom because a lot had happened in terms of some of these mundane events like going to the funeral. That you kind of forget that little quick tidbit of a scene occurred. That's what.
and then what?
Really, it was just a funny way of sort of circling back within that scene.
Also, what was funny is that like when the police officer is there, like writing, and Dante's asking questions, she just goes like, "Yeah, she's gonna be mentally damaged for like forever." I was just like laughing so hard, like, oh, she just said it so like bluntly. And then
Yeah.
another funny scene was the whole like that I don't know her name, but like there was that one customer that made a reference to like her day job is to jerk off animals, and I laughed so hard there.
Oh yeah, it was. I know what you're referring to. That was that point, and man, they took a lot of shots at specific customers, which was kind of funny to me. He was talking about it was or it was guidance counselors at like high schools, and the scene that we're referencing is there's a gentleman who's like taking apart all of these cartons of eggs, looking for the perfect dozen, and so you see him trying to find which one of the cartons has like a quote unquote perfect eggs. And so he's mixing and matching, and this other customer comes in and he's like, no, this is really common. Always happens with guidance counselors. And he's like, because they end up going insane because their like jobs don't mean anything. That's essentially what they were. So it was a big shot at like guidance counselors or people with these sort of mundane kind of jobs, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it was a funny scene for sure.
But I can relate to that because I worked at a pizza place senior year of high school / freshman year of college, and I hated it when customers would like the manager come back and say, "Oh, Chris, redo this order. They don't feel like they got enough pepperoni." Dude, I would just either put the same amount or I put even less and be like, "Let's see if they can notice." I was just because like we're so busy, and I'm like thinking like really like we're trained to like weigh it because if you put too much, obviously the business isn't like maximizing their
margins.
Their margins. So, and if you work in the restaurant business, that margins are tight. So, so you're told to weigh everything: cheese, pepperoni, pineapple, whatever obviously whatever's offered, and you put it on there. And you try to spread it out, and you put it in the oven. And I just hate it because there's always these customers. Like for every 20, there's always like one guy that was like, "Oh, I think there's not enough pepperoni. I don't think it's like the right amount." Yeah. And I would just do it again. I'd be like, let's see how many times they notice. Because honestly, most customers, they think that we put more. And I'm like, suckers. So when all those scenes about them trashing the customers, like with the eggs or like the milk, I was just like, yeah, like these customers are dumb sometimes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Honestly, that kind of scene of looking for the perfect dozen or like it's just some sort of mentality that certain people have. It's kind of like if you've ever seen those videos of people drinking wine and they'll do these taste tests. Where they'll take a fancy bottle and a cheap bottle of wine, and they'll swap the contents and they'll pour it out. And all these, blind taste testing customers are like, oh yeah, the expensive one, the one that came out of the expensive bottle is just so much superior. It's got so many aromatics. And they're like, that's actually the cheap wine. You're just sort of mentally fooling yourself into doing that. It's kind of like the same thing. They're like, I want more pepperoni, and then you come back with less. And they're just happy because they made you sort of like make another pizza.
Yeah, I always felt like the customer losed out because you have to put the pizza back in the oven, and that's already like, let's say 15 minutes. So you're waiting an extra 15 minutes for basically the same product that I gave you earlier. But okay,
right?
I could understand if the oven guy messes up. So when the oven person messes up, it's burnt. But I understood that. So, but like when you're complaining about the toppings, like we're
like
often,
for real.
like. Yeah, it's like you think I hate the customers that much, or I want to shortchange. Like you think I like the pizza place that's hiring me on minimum wage to give you less pepperoni? No, I'm just following the book orders. Like I'm not gonna put extra just because you say extra. But
I'll say order extra.
Yeah, the order extra will actually come up. At least where I work, they'll come up on the order, and then it'll actually give you the amount extra. It's right. That's how they have it. Like it'll be like, oh, extra. Like I think it was like the normal pepperoni amount was like 2.5. You had to wait, So 2.5 pound, ounces, and then like extra would be like 3.5 or 4 or something like that. And so you would just measure it and put it on, but you get charged more for it. So
yeah, it's funny. I think the sort of going back to like the funniest moments, the one that really personally just like, I don't know why, maybe it's just part of my personality, but I loved when Randall was talking about how he preferred preferred the Return of the Jedi compared to like the Empire Strikes Back. And they're having this discussion, and he's talking about how he felt bad for all of the. Essentially, he was saying there was no way that the Death Star could have been built by just the Empire. He said that based on the amount of work it would have had to have taken, they would have had to hire independent contractors from other parts of the galaxy. And he's like, those people are just collateral damage, and they're going into this. And he's like, they're essentially they have no affiliation, and yet they get killed. And so he's like really down on that. And then right at that next moment, there's a customer, and they're saying that he's an independent contracting roofer. And he tells, he sort of butts into the conversation, and he tells them, as a roofer, I can definitely tell you that we definitely inject our political or personal opinions into who we contract for. And he's like, then he tells them, he's like, just last week I was sort of out on a site for a potential customer, and he happened to be an Italian mobster. And he said, in no way did I want to deal with him. He's like, I injected my sort of personal beliefs into that decision not to take that job, even though he wanted me to pay sort of double. And he's like, so then I gave it to like my buddy, who was another independent contractor. He did it. And he's like, well, one of the dudes feuds with another mafia got in the way, and so that customer got whacked, and so did that other independent contractor. That's, for some reason, I just found that whole sequence just to be hilarious, because it's so random that they're just talking about the sort of ridiculously mundane idea that, and it doesn't really mean anything or add anything to the plot, that independent contractors would have had to be used to help build the Death Star.
And
it's so random.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that scene too is that people, I think, forget, because obviously we're watching this in the not late, but like the early 21st century, is that this movie came out before Sopranos, so they're already making references to the mob bosses that lived in New Jersey, and they still sort of do. But
New Jersey has had mafia connections for a long while. Yeah, that's something new.
Yeah, so it's interesting to like see, at least historically, because like obviously once The Sopranos got really popular, that's what people now like point to as a reference. But like it's interesting to see a small scene where like Kevin Smith is aware that like we know that there's supposed gangsters in certain areas, The Randall scenes of like they're the ones that really stick out to me. Like it was good. I genuinely enjoyed it. And then I guess what's good about this film is that like it has its comedic moments, but like I think in my opinion the climax is when Randall and Dante have that heart-to-heart fight, basically, where Dante, because
that was at the end.
Dante's theme the whole movie is I shouldn't be here, and then Randall just goes off saying like, you say this, but like you could have made you could have made a different decision at any point of today, and it would have had a different outcome. So, you should look at yourself first. And obviously they have a fight because of the girlfriend fiasco that Dante's in. But I thought that was a very real, I feel like Kevin Smith was almost saying that to himself. He was working an odd-end job. He had dropped out of the Vancouver theater school, and that he needed to start taking some responsibility of his own actions. And I think once he did, I think that's why I think a lot of people look at Kevin Smith's career and they say, look, his early movies, he had something to say. And now he just makes movies because he can with friends and he doesn't care anymore, because look, he has he got married to actually, have you seen his wife? Like, she's a pretty hot reporter. And then his kid, I didn't realize that his kid is actually named after Harley Quinn, the comic book character. That's how big of a comic book fan he is. Yeah, I forgot to mention that he sold his comic book collection to help make the movie too. So.
So we'll sort of give a reference and shout out. So not only does Kevin Smith have a comic book store in New Jersey, there's actually a show that I used to watch years ago. It was called Comic Book Men, and so every episode it was just him and a bunch of his buddies that work at his comic book store, and they would just share stories or rare comic books that they have. And if you're sort of into that culture, it's a really entertaining show to watch. So I would recommend that as well. But yeah, no, it's just interesting, sort of seeing sort of Kevin Smith's direction in Clerks. I think was this his first film?
This is his first film. Yeah, this is his first film.
Yeah, yeah. I think it definitely shows his sort of personality and his own little personal flair when, in terms of many of the scenes that he's that were shot in this movie. So I personally really enjoyed it.
And what's crazy is that he showed it at like independent film theaters, and like nobody was showing up to watch it. And I think somebody from Sundance saw it and was like, "This movie is really good." And then when it got all the way to the Weinstein Company, yes, that guy, you know, actually he didn't like the movie at all, but like all his, you know, his staffers and, you know, people who probably weren't at his position of power really liked the movie. So he decided to, like, you know, help it get financing for a wider distribution, which is why it hit more theaters. But yeah, Kevin Smith has a funny story where he says, like, he made the movie, we all thought it was good, and then we see that there's nobody in the theater. And so it's actually by a bit of luck that it's able to get some momentum and get a wider release. So,
gotcha. So I have I guess another question. What did you think about his sort of his alternative characters in Jay and Silent Bob making their appearance? Because it's both those characters, just different sort of personalities.
Yeah, I mean,
because they show up in a lot of Kevin Smith's other films too.
Yeah,
we haven't seen them.
I think because it's part of the. I forgot that's how the name is, but it's part of his like cinematic universe. It's actually it's interesting how he did what Marvel has mastered, but he did it before they did, where he has basically self-referential films between films. And actually, I think this is my interpretation. I think it's partly by accident, in the sense, at least with the first movie with Jay and Silent Bob. I think there were characters that he wanted in there for, like, you know, some randomness, but also like a bit of a different differentiator. But he had cast himself as Dante, and then realized that he can't do it all. Remember how we talked about Primer? The guy he did it all. And I think partly he just wanted a role because he wanted to be in the movie. I think you can tell, but I think he also wanted a role where he didn't have to learn any dialogue or much dialogue, you know, because there's a lot of pressure. Like, I think in any anything that you own completely, right? Whether that's a lab experiment, a company, if you're gonna do every little thing, you start, like, you know, you go crazy. So
right.
But yeah, I think those two characters, I think they probably became more of a cult, you know, following and a cult kind of like persona than I think he probably originally intended. But knowing like how Kevin Smith has done his movies, like once he saw that momentum, he was more than willing
to go down that avenue.
Yeah, to go. Basically, he's like the ultimate. In many ways, he's the ultimate fan service director. Or like, my fans like these characters. I'm gonna make movies about them.
Yeah, and let's flesh them out a little more.
Yeah, I know a lot of people view those films as like, oh, really? Like, can they carry a whole movie? But people forget that some of his movies are not for like the average viewer; they're for his fans. You know.
Yeah, of course.
And his fans are gonna watch that movie over and over again. So.
I mean, you're going to do or make media that you know is going to reach the people that are going to pay money. I mean, and that's going to be the hardcore fans, the ones that like Jay and Silent Bob a lot. I just thought it was funny because there are a couple scenes where like Kevin Smith's character Dante would interact with Jay and Silent Bob, and it was funny seeing that sort of dynamic go on there, especially when Bob sort of gives him that advice. He's like, you know, most girls wouldn't make you lasagna. You should learn to cherish that, essentially. And so I was like, oh, it's funny, like him giving advice to himself kind of deal, even though it's not meant to be the same character, but it is.
Yeah, and it's also like, I think people see this in life, right? Like, you're so busy with your day-to-day friends interaction that sometimes it takes that third person that has just been observing to give them like basically an objective view of like, hey, I don't really know you that well, but it seems like this person treats you like crap and this person treats you well, so I don't know what you're hesitating on, you know? Because sometimes in your own day-to-day life, you do get, you know, wrapped up in like, you know, your little details and stuff, and you don't see the bigger picture. So
yeah, I just find it funny because, and I'm sure you know people like this. I definitely have, that they always choose they choose the toxic person over the one that's actually like nice to them, and I never understood that.
That's a can of worms you don't need to open right now, dude.
It was just funny. Like that. Yeah, there definitely are.
But but yeah, it's but I think it's like partly like the person individual, but also it's like I said, like it's hard when you're focused on your day to day and you kind of lose perspective, you know. But yeah, it's I think that's why this movie has basically passed the test of time, because I think there's, even if you're growing up now, if like let's say you're 16, 17, I think there's a lot of themes in this movie that would relate to young people. You know, like, you know,
Well,
what should I do in my life? You know, what kind of friends I want to keep moving forward with. Most people don't want to be working at like that quick stop for 30 years. You know,
yeah.
so
Well, yeah. It's also the other thing that I think a lot of people can relate to. It's like the idea that you blame everyone else for what's going wrong with your life, rather than, because Dante blames Randall a lot. He's like, "You did this. Why the heck did you do that? You're like screwing me, basically." And Randall's like, "Dude, there's plenty of things that you could control, that you had like the ability to choose, and you essentially, the reason you're in this position is because a lot of what you could control, and you're not taking responsibility for that." Essentially, he's like, "You want to blame me for everything," and I think a lot of people can sort of relate to that, because I'm sure like a lot of people have been on the receiving end, or like in the position of Dante, or in the position of Randall at times, kind of depending. So yeah, it's a very timeless movie in that, because there is a plot, but it's more like sort of these day-to-day interactions within a specific group of two individuals, right?
yeah,
It's just like him and his like best friend, and they're not really sure what they want to do. They're at a convenience store working, and it's sort of their day-to-day interactions, essentially. And yeah, Dante for sure is not sure what the heck he wants to do, and he complains because he's working at a convenience store when it's supposed to be his day off. But he makes the decision to like go in, even though that like ruins all of his other plans. So
yeah.
yeah, it was just interesting, because it's sort of like that Monday day-to-day interaction, but they did it in a really good creative way.
It's interesting how like this movie, just like our last week's film, they're different films, but they have kind of like you'll see when I ask you my question, they have kind of like similar like questions that it's kind of like there's some overlap, but like this is also a movie just like Primer that I don't know if I would recommend to everybody, but there's
No,
certain people I would recommend it to. You know,
look, there are a lot of people that are not going to enjoy necessarily this type of humor. There's
yeah,
a lot of people that come to mind, and it's like, no, this, I already know this movie wouldn't be for you. But there's a lot of people I know, it's like, yeah, you would for sure enjoy this film. Like it's not for everyone. It's a specific audience that this is for sure.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Uh,
but
but
but it reminded me of like Primer last week, where like it's different people I'm thinking of that would enjoy this movie, and actually the people who would maybe enjoy this movie would not like Primer.
but
Yeah,
they're completely different. One's like a comedy of sort of day to day. The other one's more like very thought provoking, sort of scientific, with a lot of bigger picture questions brought up. This is more like, there are definitely some deep questions, but it's not quite to that level that
yeah.
Primer went to.
No, what I just find interesting is that like it has the same thing where like there's gonna be a lot of people that are just gonna be put off, you know, whether that's Primer or this one. That's what I found like kind of weird.
Sure.
When I was watching it at the end, I was like, oh wow, it's like we're watching another movie where like there's only a subset of people who would actually recommend this movie to.
Well, I think that's why both films have developed their own cult followings, right? There's a reason these films, beside just the small sort of distribution and low budgets, there's a reason why it hasn't gained like universal attraction, if you will, because these films are meant for certain people. It's just how it is. Some people will like both of them for sure. I mean, I think we both did. Um, some are only going to like one or the other. Some might not like either. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just kind of depends on your personal taste, right? But yeah, I think a lot of the sort of language and dialogue is definitely not for everybody in this film. But as people in their 20s growing up at this point in time as millennials or even younger or possibly older, there are a lot of people that are going to enjoy sort of some of the witty banter that goes along in the film.
Yeah, and okay, at least one of my last points. Going back to the beginning of the film, I thought it was again funny that like the guy was like anti-cigarettes, and then it turns out he's
Yeah,
like chewing gum representative. I was just like, oh, that's like so true. We're like,
that goes all.
the cigarettes will kill you. You need to get chewing gum, and then like they find
Yeah.
out is you're a chewing gum representative. You're pushing your agenda.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's personally motivated, right? Especially in sort of today's day and age. Especially, you can even think of today with like the coronavirus. People are sort of pushing their narrative or agenda. It's no different from that chewing guy dude. A lot of people are just want to make money. That's what it comes down to.
And then I just
right?
like the peak of that joke was like, if you're selling cigarettes, you're like the Nazis. I was laughing so hard.
I was like, this guy, what did he call him? I actually wrote it down. Oh, he called him a cancer merchant. I was just like, wow, the label. And he gets all of the smokers to he basically incites a mob and they all start throwing the cigarettes at him. I was dying of laughter. And then you find out, because he was playing himself as if he were a doctor talking about all the lung damage. And then at the end, Dante's girlfriend comes in. He's like, who do you really work for? And he's like, I'm a rep for Truly's Gum. And, and he's like, get out of here.
Yeah.
But he's like, dude, I don't get paid enough for this. I'm not a campus merchant. He's like, I'm just here trying to make money on my minimum wage slave labor sort of type of salary. And so I just thought it was funny. He's like, he has his low paying job and now he's getting called a Nazi for no reason.
Yeah.
It was pretty funny. They had a lot of very random sort of mundane scenes that were just I don't know, they just brought a lot of laughter out just based on some of the dialogue or the sort of ridiculous surrealness of the shots.
Yeah.
And sequences. The other part that I really liked a lot was when one of the customers was trying to get the last little bit of Pringles chips in the can, and so his hand gets stuck, and there's definitely been some sequences like this that not quite within Pringles cans, but other things where it's you trying to pull or help somebody, and then he pulls so hard, and the customer falls back into one of the trays of snacks. I thought that was just that was funny. That sort of little tidbit scenes of trying to get the last little bit of Pringles.
Did you catch on after Dante is the one that ate the rest of the chips? I thought that was funny too.
I did.
And instead of sticking his hand, he just put the can on the he had it pour out to his hand. I was just like, that's just the customer. Come on, dude. It's funny though.
It was. Again, it's sort of there wasn't a whole lot of necessarily plot to this movie. It's just some of those little scenes that I think a lot of people can sort of relate to. Or have seen people been a part of throughout their day-to-day things.
Yeah, and to something I think you captured it very well earlier in our conversation that it's kind of a banter movie because there's a lot of scenes. Maybe because I'm older, I have more perspective. There's a lot of scenes in there where I'm there was a lot of random days in college and high school where I just had banter days where we were just shit talking, it wasn't
oh yeah, especially as dudes,
yeah, we weren't that's what I mean, especially with your group of friends, it's this movie, it reminded me of that where there was just I'm not going to remember all the days, but I know there was just so many days where we were just we were shooting hoops and then we were just talking gossip or trash, and I'm just thinking see, it's the same for everybody.
Oh yeah, that's what I mean by this is a very timeless movie because a lot of people can relate to it. Yeah. In terms of those interactions with your best friend or best friends, and you're gonna have stuff like that.
Or even with random people, right? There's people that I don't talk to anymore that we had random banter moments, and I think you see that in the movie too, where there's a lot of people that you can tell that Dante knows of, and he's not really that close with, and he still will play hockey with them, shoot the breeze, as they say, with other folks. So I think that's also why it's pretty timeless too. So
yeah, it was funny. I just and there's definitely been a lot of convenience stores that have been super run down or janky that I've been to. That's another thing I think a lot of people can relate to, going to that low down kind of convenience store. It's just Dante gets there and then he's trying to open up the store and some punk jerk shoves gum in it so he can't open any of the locks because it's clogged. It's I've been to stores where not necessarily that has happened, but there's been weird random things where I'm wow, this is janky, man. You need to get that fixed, but they don't have the money to do so.
Especially if you do a road trip. I know you did a really long one, but if you do any road trip, you hit those kind of gas stations. I remember once my dad and I were driving to San Diego, and I had to use the bathroom, and the clerk says, "Oh, it's in the back. Here's the key," and he gives me the key. But then when I turn the knob, the door just the door's broken. I'm like, I don't even need the key. Like I can just walk in here.
Yeah.
Like, why does he give you the key for? Okay, whatever. But I get it back. I was like, okay, then there's like no door. I don't know why we need a key. I was just laughing.
Yeah, like I said, yeah, I think a lot of people can. If you've ever sort of traveled around a bit, you've definitely run into those gas stations where it's like, or like convenience stores, like, I need to get something, but it's like, seems pretty sketchy, like going around, especially with his do-it-yourself, we're still open sign, which I love how they kept referencing that he smelled like shoe polish to the beginning scene, where he puts like that cloth tarp on saying, no, seriously, we're still open. Yeah, no, I mean, there were a lot of just funny moments. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. It's definitely, I can see why it's a cult classic for sure. Like it's pretty evident once you watch it. You're like, yeah, I see why. Like, there's definitely it's hardcore fan base for this film.
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't happen all the time, but I know that when I moved here, like I think it's I don't know if it's every year. I think it's every like a few years, but they usually have they do like a whole marathon of all these movies, and I think in Red Bank. So, and it's usually like 300 people show up to those, and actually Kevin Smith's there giving autographs and selfies. So, he's somebody that definitely he has I would say a very, you can tell from a comic book guy, he knows how to cultivate a relationship with his fans, his diehard fans, and like how to not look down upon them like they're just money. Like kind of like I would say a lot of bigger franchises, won't name them right here, but bigger franchises have done. He knows how to at least appeal to his audience. So.
No, he definitely does, and I can't say I'm the biggest Kevin Smith fan, but from some of the interviews I've seen, seems like really down to earth, and I can see why. He's generally pretty well liked from most people. I haven't heard a lot of hate coming from any big groups of people like you can see from many other sort of directors or celebrities. So I mean, I personally just like listening to him because he's pretty down to earth, real dude. Especially when he's talking about his comic books, or there was another interview that you showed me a while back talking about where he was supposed to be some producer asked him to be the director, but he wanted to hijack his film, and so he was talking about a little bit of his experience with that.
The Superman one, and and we'll hopefully put a link in the description of this video. But he was supposed to direct Superman, but a producer wanted basically to control the whole script, or have
wanted to hijack it.
Yeah, have certain things in it, and he gives a great. It's funny. It's a Q&A, but really it turns into a stand-up act of the story of how it. He was just F this, dude. I can't do it.
Yeah, and I mean, again, neither of us are in film, but now, especially after watching that short little clip about talking about how he was supposed to be the director of a Superman film in the 90s, you can see how some people really get fed up from a directorial standpoint with those hands-on kind of producers who really want to be in the nitty-gritty. They kind of remind me of these gosh darn, because we're big sports fans too, of a Jerry Jones or who am I thinking of, Al Davis, these football team owners who really want to get their hands in when in reality you should just let the coaches do their job.
Or you just have a really bad owner like the Knicks owner.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, who not only meddles but also doesn't make any good decisions.
Right. Well, I mean, Al Davis certainly had his share of blunders, especially later in his ownership career.
Yeah, that's true. But
So what did you think of this film overall? Would you think of it positively? What would you give it on a 1 to 10 scale?
I think I would give this an 8 out of 10. It has for me personally, it has a high level of rewatchability, and also I can see it's a movie that I would share more often than not than Primer even, and I
would say this has a broader audience than Primer.
Yeah, and then as somebody who's lived in New Jersey for 4 years, I mean, it's a good movie. Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah. This film, I would agree. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. This gave me a nostalgia kind of factor. especially for those video sort of rental stores. There's a lot of like sort of things that kind of hit home to like when I was like a younger kid. So it was good, kind of like reminiscing, feeling that nostalgia that this film brought out. Because even though it's like set in New Jersey, it's sort of that, like I was saying, that 90s feel in terms of like the clothes they're wearing, or even like some of the hairstyles that some of the female actresses were sporting in this film as well. It was definitely like a throwback to the 90s.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I would definitely recommend this film too. Any final thoughts, man?
Not really. I think we covered everything, really. Like, I have nothing else to positively say about the movie. Even on a negative front, there was not much I disliked even. It's it's a movie that, like, I just don't give it a 10 out of 10 because, I'm a person, I'm somebody who has a hard time giving out those kind of scores. So, but honestly, on my personal scale, like in general, like anything that's like an 8 or above is definitely something that I would watch, like,
It's good.
again and again.
Yeah, no, I would definitely second that. I mean, it's not like one of the best films I've ever seen, so I think that's probably why I would give it like an 8. But it is something that I could see myself like going to, especially if I want to like a laugh and see some of that sort of day-to-day kind of humor again. Yeah, it's definitely a film I would rewatch. It just like kind of depends on your mood. But yeah, anyway, I think those are sort of our final thoughts. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another film, so just stay tuned. If you enjoyed our format, our takes on this movie, please give us a like and please subscribe to our channel. And yeah, we'll see you next week.